But now we're on Daf Nunam at Beis, and we're learning the Gzeir Shava of Rebbe. And Rebbe has a Gzeir Shava from the Par V'Soyer of Yom Kippurim to the Par of Kohen Gadol. Malahalon, just like the Torah says, that in the case of burning the Par of the Kohen Gadol, Al Yedei Nituach Shelo Behefshet, right? We take apart the parts of the bull before we take it out to burning, but we don't take the or off it. Afkan here, with regard to the Par V'Sar of Yom Kippurim, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to, right, these are called the Parim HaNisraf. We're going to take it out to burn, but we're not going to burn it until we take apart the various members. That's called Nituach, and there's no Afshot. We don't take off the or. Okay, so what do we see here for our purposes? Right? We have one Gzeira Shava and another Gzeira Shava. We had one Gzeira Shava to establish, based on a Gzeira Shava between Ola and Paro Shel Kohen Gadol, that the power of Kohen Gadol, like the Ola, does not require Hafshata. It does require Nituach, but not Hafshata. And now we're going to use that in order to derive the conclusion that Par V'Sar Shel Yom Kippurim, through the Gzeira Shava of Rebbe to Paro Shel Kohen Gadol, likewise will require Nituach, but no Afshata. So you see that you could build one Gzeira Shava on top of the other. Davar Lami B'Gzeira Shava, Mao Shilami B'Kal V'Chomer. Okay, now Gzeira Shava is very powerful, and Kal V'Chomer is very powerful. So it would seem that if B is derived from A through Gzeir Shava, then C should be derived from B with the Kal V'Chomer. And the Gemara says, guess what? I'm going to answer your question with a Kal V'Chomer. Kal V'Chomer. Uma Hekesh. In other words, the Gemara is now going to try to prove to you how powerful a Kal V'Chomer is. Eino Melami Behekesh. Okay, I don't know how much time we're going to spend now on this, because we'll just run out of time. Imin Rava, Imin Ravina. Again, we'd have to go back to Rava and Ravina, but in any event, Rava and Ravina, each in their own way, established that you can't build one Hekesh on another Hekesh, because again, Hekesh is lower down on the totem pole. And this was all the sugya that we learned yesterday, or we should have learned yesterday. So there's a hekesh between Paro Shel Kohen Gadol and Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur regarding what is Niktar al Gabi Mizbeach, and there's an Imeno Inyan. Okay, fine. We'd have to go through this again and do a chazor of yesterday's shir, but let's just leave that for another time and just grant the Gemara's assumption that whether or not you take Rava's learning or Ravina's learning, you cannot derive a hekesh from a hekesh. So B is derived from A with a hekesh, C cannot be derived from B with a hekesh. And yet, if B is derived from a hekesh, then B could teach C with a kal v'chomer. Midatane debei Rabbi Shmuel. That was one of the lists and the rules in the original holy brisa of Rabbi Shmuel. So what do you see? You see how powerful a kal v'chomer is. It's much more powerful than a hekesh, because a hekesh can't be built on another hekesh, but a kal v'chomer could be built on another hekesh. Is Gzeira Shava, which is even greater than a kal v'chomer. And I'll prove it to you because we have Rav Papa, and Rav Papa was able to derive from a hekesh a Gzeira Shava. So he built a Gzeira Shava on top of a hekesh, which again, let's just very quickly review Rav Papa. Rav Papa said that what? Let me just go over this one more time. Sorry, because we need the whiteboard here. We had Xera Shava equating um, Paro Shel Kohen Gadol with an Ola, and then what did we have? And then we had a Hekesh to teach you about the R. So it was a Hekesh that was built on top of Xera Shava. Eino din shetalami b'kal v'chomer. So that if the power of Xera Shava is that it could use a Hekesh to teach you C, so B is derived from A with Xera Shava, now could teach you C with Xera Shava, then how much more so can B derived from Xera Shava teach you a Kal v'chomer? C is with a Kal v'chomer. Yeah, but wait a minute. Remember that Mar Zutra was the one who contended against Rav Papa. Is Hanicha, this makes sense, Lamanda Isle Rav Papa. Okay, Ravina, if you remember, accepted Rav Papa, but Mar Zutra did not. Elamanda Lesle Rav Papa, my Ikala Meimar. So we're going to have to come up with another proof that you could derive a Kal v'chomer from a Gzera Shava. Elo Kal v'chomer. We're going to now we're going to substitute another Kal v'chomer. Ma hekesh she'eino malami behekesh. Again, we said either Rava's way or Ravina's way that a hekesh cannot be built on a hekesh. Is nevertheless malami b'Kal v'chomer. You see that even though a hekesh is weaker than a Kal v'chomer, but a Kal v'chomer is stronger than a hekesh, and that's Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. Is Zer Shava? Can you build one Gzera Shava on top of another Gzera Shava? Gzera Shava Malamedes Gzera Shava Chaverta. Neither Rami Bar Chama, right? We had Rami Bar Chama who said that you could build one Gzera Shava on another. Is Einodin Shetalami B'Kal v'chomer. If a Gzera Shava could teach you for another Gzera Shava, then it should teach you for a Kal v'chomer, because a Kal v'chomer we saw was greater than a Hekesh. So we're putting Kal v'chomer now on top of the totem pole, and we're saying that certainly that which is derived from Gzera Shava can now teach you something through a Kal v'chomer. Davar alami b'Gzera Shava ma'u shilan binyanam. Okay, now how far are you going to go with the power of Gzera Shava? We said that Gzera Shava is really top on the totem pole, maybe right below Kal v'chomer, but Binyanav is all the way on the bottom of the totem pole. So can the top of the totem pole be powerful enough to generate and propel you to a Binyan We don't know the answer to that question. Now, Dover Alamid b'Kal v'chomer Maushi Alamid b'Hekesh. We said the Hekesh is very weak, but Kal v'chomer is very powerful. So is a Kal v'chomer, it's as if it's explicit, and now I can use it for a Hekesh. And the Gemara says I'll apply the logic of a Kal v'chomer. Uma Gzera Shava she'eino l'meida behekesha. So that if you derive something from a hekesh, you could not, according to Rabbi Yochanan at least, you could not build a Gzera Shava on top of a hekesh. But Melamed behekesh, right? And a Gzera Shava could teach you. No, if B is derived from A with the Gzera Shava, then C, which is derived from B with a Hekesh, is valid. And that was Rav Papa. Is Kal v'chomer alomed me Hekesh. Mida Rabbi Yishmael eno din shilami behekesh. So Gzera Shava is very powerful, and therefore you should be able to derive, as we saw from Rav Papa, a Hekesh from a Gzera Shava. Certainly you should be able to derive a Kal v'chomer from a Gzera Shava. No, I'm sorry. What we're saying is that if you start with a Kal v'chomer, then you should be able to derive from the power of a Kal v'chomer a Hekesh. And that's based on Rav Papa, right? Because Rav Papa already taught us that something that's derived from Xeris Shava, like the case of par that is equated with Ola, as far as Nituach is concerned, can then go ahead and teach you with a Hekesh. And certainly, therefore, that which is derived from a Kal Vachomer should be able to teach you something with a Hekesh. But Hanicha, again, that only goes according to Rav Papa. But according to Marzutra, Elamad de Leslie Rav Papa, Michael Amema, what are you going to say? Take. So basically, according to Marzutra, we don't have an answer to this question. Dover Alomed Mikal Vachomer, Mao Shilamed Gzeir Shava. And this seems simple to me, that if you put both Kal Vachomer and Gzeir Shava on top of the agenda, the power, then certainly Gzeir Shava could be able to be built on top of a Kal Vachomer. And Gemara says Kal Vachomer. The logic really dictates that. Uma Gzeir Shava she'eino lemeda behekesha. Right, so once you start with a hekesh, you don't derive anything from a gzeir shava mida Rabbi Yochanan. That was Rabbi Yochanan's rule. But nevertheless, malamed gzeir shava. So you have one gzeir shava on top of the gzeir shava mida Rabbi Bar Chama. Is kal vachomer halamed behekesh. Right, the case of a kal vachomer that can be derived from a hekesh mida tani to Bei Rabbi Shmuel and udin shetalamed gzeir shava. So certainly a kal vachomer that has the ability to teach a hekesh, certainly would have, right, and Gzeir Shava is greater than hekesh, then certainly it goes without saying that Kal Vachomer would be powerful enough to use it as a springboard for Gzeir Shava. Davar alamed b'Kal Vachomer, ma'ushi alamed b'Kal Vachomer. Again, that seems logical, except the only problem is that Kal Vachomer is a logical deduction. So now you're building one logical deduction and you're hoping that your logic is soundproof, and then you're going with another logical derivation called the Kal Vachomer to derive from the first logical Kal Vachomer. So the Gemara says this too is very logical because Uma Gzeir Shava she'eino lemeda behekesh. Right, Gzeir Shava is not, says Rabbi Yochanan, on the powerful level such that it could generate a hekesh, or can be generated on top of a hekesh, and yet malamid b'kal vachomer, right? Kinamor, and that's what we derived. This kal vachomer alamid behekesh mitaton de beishol, and it didn't she alamid b'kal vachomer. Bezeu kal vachomer ben kal vachomer. The Gemara says that's why very often you'll see that we use in the Talmud the phrase kal vachomer ben kal vachomer. The Gemara says ben beno shel kal vachomer. If you're technical about it, A teaches B, so B is derived from A, so B is already the ben that's derived from the father. Now you want to derive C from the ben, so it's really ben beno. Why do you call it beno shel kal vachomer? It's ben beno shel kal vachomer. Ella says the Gemara, let me reformulate. Kal vachomer, what is the kal vachomer from which we derive that you can derive B with a kal vachomer and then derive C from a kal vachomer from B? Ma hekesh eino lamid behekesh. E midarave e midaravina. Malam kal vachomer midatani be'Rishmael is kal vachomer lamid behekesh midatani be'Rishmael. Eino din she'alamid bekal vachomer. Bezel kal vachomer ben kal vachomer. Okay, let's see. What time is it now? Just trying to look at the clock. Oh, it's 20 after. So we have a few more minutes. We'll just finish the daf. Davar halomed bekal vachomer, and we said the kal vachomer is very powerful to generate, is ma'ushi alamed b'binyanav. Okay, now I derive C from B. B was derived from A with the kal vachomer. Now B becomes the source, the basis for a binyanav. Omer Avina Toshma. I'm going to prove it to you from a Mishnah. And this is a Mishnah later on Daf Samach Tes. Molak v'nimtzeis treifa. Right? We said that Malika in oath chatas of, olas of, whatever it might be, is a substitute for shchita. However, shchita is only valid if the animal is a healthy animal. If it's a treifa, then shchita is meaningless. What about malika? You did malika, which is a substitute for shchita, and now you find, lo and behold, that the bird is a treifa. You open up its innards, and it's got a hole in its lungs. Here we have machlokas. Now, in order to understand this machlokas, we have to introduce another concept, which is called tumas beis habliya. In a nevela, which means that an animal is dead without a proper shchita, if you eat from that animal a kazayis, not only is that a violation of achilas treifa or nevela, but in addition, it's metame bebeis habliya. Once that kazayis hits your throat on the way down, you're tame tumas beis habliya. So Rabbi Meir says, Eina metame beis habliya. Once you did the malika, although the malika is not going to be matu the basal achila because it's nimtzeis treifa, but nevertheless the malika does, I'll use the Yiddish phrase, tuoif, right? It accomplishes something. It removes the tuma of beis habliya. And Rabbi Yehuda says, metame beis habliya. Rabbi Yehuda says that which is intuitively logical, that since the malika cannot be matir the basar, because it turns out to be a treifa, so then you're back to the din of nevela, and nevela generates a tumas beis habliya. Rabbi Meir. So now the ball's in the court of Rabbi Meir to try to defend himself, that he makes this distinction between the efficacy of the malika and the treifa as far as the basar, where it's not effective, but it is effective to remove tumas beis habliya. And Rabbi Meir derives this from a Kal V'chomer. Uma nevelas behema. Okay, now at this point, Rabbi Meir wants to compare ophos to behemos regarding tumah. Now, in both cases, the creature, whether it's an animal or a bird, died without a proper shechita. And that means that its basar is nevela. And the question is whether that basar is metame, not only bebeis habliya, but even b'maga. So you came into physical contact with the basar of nevela. Now this could be a nevela of a behema or a nevela of an oaf. And here the Torah makes the distinction. Nevelas behema mitame b'maga uvimasa, meaning either if you touch the nevela of an animal, you contract tumah, or if you carry it without touching it. So we're talking about the dead animal, and it generates a tumah b'maga uvimasa, not just b'bleis habli if you eat part of it. And yet the halacha is that shchitasa mitaheres treifasa mitumasa. Wow. So if you have an animal that turns out to be a treifa, the shchita of that animal is meaningful in hilchas tumah v'tara. Again, the shchita cannot be matir the basar, because the basar, as we said, is nevela, it's mitame b'maga u'masa, right? But the shchita is meaningful as far as being mitayr. Now, nevelas of eina mitame b'maga u'masa. Right, we said that there's a distinction between an animal and a bird when it dies without shechita, as far as tumas magu mas is concerned. So, whereas an oaf is common to a behema regarding tumas beis habliya, but it doesn't have that common tuma of magu mas. And then certainly, enudin, therefore, shetehei shchitasa b'teres treifasa mi tumasa. If in an animal, the animal is a treifa, and yet, although the shechita of the animal could not possibly be matir the basal achila, but yet it is a metayah, such that the nevela, the carcass of the animal, is not metame. Then how much more so in the case of an oaf, where in the case of an oaf there is no such thing as tumas maga umasa in a nevela of an oaf. How much more so should the shechita of a bird that's treifa be mitayr midei nevela. In any event, we see that according to Rabbi Meir, at least, you can derive a kal v'chomer in order to establish that the shchita of a treifa in the case of an oaf is mitayr midei nevela. And therefore, if he eats the meat of an oaf that turned out to, after Malika, to be a treifa, he's not mitari b'beis habli. Okay, fine. So you have Rabbeir's kavachomer, but we want to know whether that which you derive from a kavachomer can now teach you with a binyan am. So he says the following: Mamatzinu b'shchita. Mamatzinu is ready a binyan am. Shemachsharta b'achila. Right, in general, I'm not talking about a treifa now. Shchita is matu the boss of achila. And mitaheres treifasim mitmos, and it accomplishes another achievement that the shchita is mitar midei tumas nevela is af malika shemachsharta be'achila. Right, we said that in the case of a chatas oaf or an olas oaf, the malika substitutes for shchita, it has the same status as shchita, is then to tire treifasa mitumasa. Then certainly the malika process should be a matayr. If malika is a matir for achila, then it's also matayr for tuma, and that's based on a binyan av to an animal. Because in the case of an animal, the shchita is both matir the basar and it's matayr the basar. Rabbi Yossi Omer Daya b'nevelas behema tahora. So Rabbi Yossi disagrees, and he rejects his whole presentation that's based on Rabbi Meir, and he comes to the conclusion that although in the case of a nevela of a behema, the shchita is mitayer, but that doesn't give you a right to jump to the conclusion that malika is a mitayr. But in any event, Rabbi Meir, if we go back to Rabbi Meir, uses a kal v'chomer, and then he establishes a binyan av based on the kal v'chomer. So we'll just go, I know we're already at 10:30, we'll just go 2 more minutes just to finish the sugya of Elohu. And the Gemara says that this proof from Rabbi Meir is not a valid proof, because Rabbi Meir is not relying on the binyan av. Tehevi he mishchita dechulin kasinon. So now we have, instead of a binyan av, we have a hekesh. And we have shchita dechulin kasinon. Right, so we want to derive the conclusion that malika is mitayr from shchita, in shchita's chulin. And therefore, we're not really deriving anything from karbanos, right? All the limitations that we want to impose here based on Rabbi Yochanan are only within the realm of karbanos. But here, the binyan av is from shchita's chulin, and therefore it's not related to kodshin. So therefore, Rabbi Meir's combination of kal v'chomer and binyan av, okay, it's a kal v'chomer with a binyan av, but the binyan av itself comes from the world of chulin rather than from the world of kodshin. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop for today. Thank you very much.